Welcome to part 4 of this tour of the posters in the Grateful Dead concert poster exhibition running at the Narrow Center through April 1, 2023. This poster was done by Harvey Cohen for the Mantra Rock Dance that happened on January 29, 1967. The Mantra Rock Dance was a counterculture music event organized by followers of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness as an opportunity to address a wider public. The Grateful Dead and other bands agreed to perform for free, with proceeds donated to the local Hare Krishna temple. The Mantra Rock Dance concert was later called the major spiritual event of the San Francisco hippie era, and Allen Ginsberg called it the height of Haight-Ashbury's spiritual enthusiasm, the first time that there had been a music scene in San Francisco where everybody could be a part of it and participate. The Hare Krishna mantra and dancing became adopted in some ways by all levels of the counterculture, and this is where it started. By the end of the summer of 1967, there was no question that San Francisco was the capital of the new counterculture and that its music scene was second to none. The Airplane, The Dead, and Big Brother were the big San Francisco bands at the time, and so Bill Graham took them to Hollywood. Interestingly, part of the San Francisco scene included free-form dancing on an open floor, and yet the Hollywood Bowl was set up for a seated concert. Security enforced a demilitarized zone in front of the stage and allowed no one through. This stood as a symbol of the difference between a more formal Los Angeles and the freewheeling hippie capital of San Francisco. This cool San Francisco Victorian poster was by Jim Blashfield. This is a second printing, a silkscreen by John Van Hammersveld, who was a prominent American artist who created the poster for the Endless Summer surfing movie and the covers of Magical Mystery Tour, Exile on Main Street, and Skeletons from the Closet, among others. This November 1967 poster was billed as Amazing Electric Wonders, and it took place at the Shrine in Los Angeles. The next day, the Dead went up into the hills where they met George Harrison's guru, the Maharishi, and they received their personal mantras to begin practicing transcendental meditation. Not sure if they actually did, but still. Here's a February 1968 poster by Bob Freed called Trip and Ski. The show was in the tiny Lake Tahoe community of Kings Beach, and the venue was a bowling alley. These shows have been released as Dick's Picks Volume 22. This Alton Kelly poster advertised some March 1968 shows at the Carousel Ballroom in San Francisco. In early 1968, the Carousel was operated by a collective formed by the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, and Quicksilver Messenger Service as a sort of social musical laboratory experiment and an alternative to Bill Graham's business-like approach at the Fillmore. Results were mixed at best, and this poster, known as Sore Thumb, was a comment by Kelly on the do-it-yourself nature of the enterprise. Meanwhile, the original Fillmore was running into problems. Located in the largely black Western Addition neighborhood, the area was filled with unrest following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1968. Graham was looking for options, and he decided to find the owner of the Carousel and see if he could take over the lease from the bands. He was successful. The bands were actually quite relieved to be able to go back to being bands and not business people. And in early July 1968, Graham shut down the original Fillmore, took over the Carousel Ballroom, and renamed it the Fillmore West. Here's another Alton Kelly poster for the Carousel Ballroom, done for shows over Memorial Day weekend in 1968. One of the stipulations that the bands made regarding the Carousel was that as the owners, in effect, they would play for free. In the 6 months of operations under band management, the Dead played there 16 times. Here we are in the summer of 1968, and we are introduced to a new artist in the Bill Graham stable, Lee Conklin. Conklin's psychedelic style took the form of hidden pictures, and indeed in this poster, known as the Santana Lion, of course, there are at least 9 faces or figures. Santana was still a year away from releasing their first album, but when they did, they asked Conklin to see if he could repurpose this image into their cover art. I'd say he succeeded. This summer of 1968 collaboration between Rick Griffin and Alton Kelly advertised 2 weeks of shows and showcases some wonderful Art Nouveau influenced border work. Here's another poster from November of 1968 from the Mad, Mad World of Lee Conklin. Full of animals, body parts, faces, and fun, the Grateful Dead were added after Conklin had pretty much finished the poster, and so you can see how he cleverly hung their name over the Quicksilver lettering on top. And another Lee Conklin poster with photo by Herb Green from March of 1969. Called Flames, it is, of course, full of hidden faces. The 1969 album Live Dead was composed of live versions of songs from these shows at the Fillmore West and also those advertised on the Oxymoxa poster. This unusual and exceptionally rare poster by Laura and Jan Gottwald is a first printing, but the top and the bottom were removed as extraneous by the owner. It features a Roy Lichtenstein type of cartoon panel, repeated a la Andy Warhol in the foreground, with a mushroom cloud behind. The show was with Santana on March 29, 1969 at an ice skating rink in Las Vegas. This poster promoted an April 12, 1969 show that took place at the Union Ballroom at the University of Utah. It was known as the SDS Ball, supporting the Students for a Democratic Society organization on campus. Artist Richard Taylor, who later became the art director for the early Tron and Star Trek movies, created this poster, and it is from the first run of 300 pieces, making it very scarce. 1969 saw 2 new artists working for Bill Graham, and here is one of them, Randy Tootin, with the June 5 through 8, 1969 poster for The Dead and Junior Walker. Jerry Garcia admitted once in an interview that he was late to a Fillmore West show and found the Grateful Dead on stage during their 6th song, Love Light, with someone else on lead guitar. Garcia was often late to shows, and June 6th was the night that Bill Graham got fed up and simply put on stage whatever guitar player he could find who was in the house. One of the shows in this run contained an episode where everybody got dosed heavily and could barely play, an event best and very colorfully described by Phil Lesh in his book, Searching for the Sound. Sadly, this is the only Dead poster that we have in the show by the great Bonnie McLean. She replaced Wes Wilson working for, and being married to, Bill Graham back in 1967, and did many posters showcasing her more nuanced psychedelic style. Here's a later poster by her from October 1969. By the end of 1969, well, sort of by definition, the 1960s were coming to a close. Bill Graham's other new artist was David Singer, who created surreal collages and surrounded them with funky but mostly legible lettering. This poster is historically important because the 3rd show didn't take place. It was the same day as Altamont, and after the Dead refused to play there in the late afternoon because of the violent atmosphere, Bill Graham canceled that night at the Fillmore West. David Singer's image of a furtive-looking man's face drowning in pills symbolized the end of the hippie ideal, as psychoactive drugs like pot and LSD were replaced by cocaine, speed, and heroin. The other band on the bill, Humble Pie, was fronted by Steve Marriott from the Small Faces and 19-year-old guitarist Peter Frampton. Here's another surreal composition by David Singer. This poster is called Mushroom Man, and it's from February of 1970. This poster by David Singer was the only time that Miles Davis and the Grateful Dead ever played together on the same bill, from April 1970. Miles Davis had just released Bitches Brew and opened the shows. The Dead, watching the performance, were blown away and thought that they should have opened for Miles, saying to themselves, how on earth can we possibly follow that? David Singer, once again, June 1970. The Grateful Dead and their pals, the New Riders of the Purple Sage. By 1971, the psychedelic ballrooms were all closing down as live performance rock and roll had moved from a small cottage industry in 1966 to big business after Woodstock. Bands were playing Madison Square Garden now, and promoters were using FM radio and newspapers to sell tickets instead of posters stapled to telephone poles. Here's the poster by David Singer for the closing of the Fillmore West in July 1971. And with that, we're on to part 5.